be talking about Irenosen's work, her new novel, and her Black to the Future initiative, which has taken off in London. Irenosen is a short story writer, novelist, festival curator, competition judge, advocate for black artists. She's written 2 novels, 2 short story collections, theatre initiatives, essays, and been involved in filmmaking. She's also judged a lot of big competitions in the UK. She's been a judge for the Women's Prize, the London Short Story Prize, Royal Society of Literature, BBC National Short Story Prize. Lots of reading. And in 2018, Irenosen was elected a fellow in the Royal Society of Literature and served as 4 years as vice chair. And in 2021, she was awarded an MBE for services to literature. In 2023, she was named a visionary artist by Red Magazine's Next 25 Visionaries to Watch. And her body of work is extensive. I'll just start with the fiction, really. 2015, her novel Butterfly Fish came out. 2016, her short story collection Spic Gigantula came out, and both were award-winning books that have sort of entered, I think, into current UK canon of very imaginative writing. 2019, Nudie Branch came out, which is a short story collection championed by Margaret Atwood as a wild and recommended read. And the story within the collection, Grace Jones won the prestigious Caine Prize. This year, Irenosen's novel, Curandera, has come out and is forthcoming in the US with Soft Skull Publishing. It's been described as a thrilling experimental novel that explores shamanism, female desire, friendship and betrayal across time and dimensions. And as we said before, Irenosen is founder of the Black to the Future festival, an Afrofuturist hybrid festival celebrating outstanding black artists. Interestingly, your tagline on X is Afronaut, liminal griot, and genre bender, which I really liked. So please welcome Irenosen, and now that you've heard about her work.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that wonderful
resume.
Introduction. Yeah, I always forget. So
you've done so much.
It's interesting
You've
hearing
done so
you
much.
like reading through it.
No, I think it's really important to introduce a writer so we know exactly where they're coming from, and then we'll delve into their mind and the creative process. I want to start with a quote because I don't know if many of you are familiar with Irenosen's work. It's from the White Review 2022. And I think it really effectively sums up the effect that her writing has upon you and her inventiveness, which is slightly crazy, extremely literary, and memorable. I think all of her writing falls into a very special category of experience. Okojie's writing twists and shifts the world as we know, opening up realms of exhilarating and sometimes terrifying uncertainty. Her work is dizzyingly rich with symbolism, metaphor, and startling narrative turns, undergirded by a deep understanding of human frailty and empathy for her characters. So keep that in mind as Irenosen reads from Curandera.
So I'm going to read from Curandera, which Catherine introduced. But just to preface it, Curandera is a novel about shamanism, female desire, friendship, and betrayal across time and dimensions. We have 2 timelines, 17th century Cape Verde in Africa with one band of shamans, which includes Zulmira, and then another timeline in modern London with another group of shamans, and they're all kind of connected. And the novel is essentially about the 2 time periods sort of bleeding into each other, as well as I would describe it as a mythic revenge tale. But I'm going to read from their 17th century Cabo Verde section. All pregnant, 5 of us glimmer on the snaky path towards the low cacophony of the humming creek. Dusky goddesses breach through buried carcasses. We hear gifts turning in the ground's crevices. Barefoot, we sing to Oni clutching one bone each. Lengthy red beads knock against our chests. The insides of rounded stomachs jostle with the rhythm of parched entities. White markings on our foreheads fade to confuse the forest traffic. Inky trickles slither from our braided crowns down craned necks. Our nipples are pert against the morning. Behind us, the mountains of Gethsemane loom. A slow mist unfurls to reveal crooked homesteads in its folds, waiting to be shed in a purging between orbs of fire and a fog that will blind the fishermen, that will catch them in their own nets, while the sea's creatures buck against the holes in the boats, sharing one eye, as their wives lose their bottom halves in fevered dreams. We sing, the mountains bruised and magisterial in their morning stupor, absorb our voices, sprawling peaks and troughs dimpled with dew. White cloths wrapped around our waists feel loose on sweat-glazed skin, rustling against our thighs. The hems trailing behind us are pale, movable dawns. We ask our reflections to wait patiently for us in the water. Tell floating lilies to be soft landing pads for a small reckoning. We ask the light bending to allow our internal bleeding to leak through our nipples into its axis points. We call Oni to build a golden arch marked with her fingerprints, so traces of peyote beneath our tongues will know their inheritance. We dance, we chant, hollering abandons, our mouths chase a fleet-footed spirit, marking areas for reinventions between trembling trees. At the bank, we scoop translucent sap from conspiratorial trees. The sky is starting to blush blue. The creek's seductive language threatens to break liquid confines. We call Oni by her name, walk into the water, form a ring. The water rises, its cold temperature cocooning weeds, grazing our feet in the murky depths below. We raise our heads to the heavens as the sky rattles, just as one of us confesses to carrying a fetus that fell from a mountain. One by one we speak. One of us proclaims she has been plagued by locusts wielding a strain of fever, scuttling through her bloodstream, hundreds of them gathering in her stomach, digging thin, sharp legs into the lining, their flutterings ringing so loudly she can hear it while she breathes as they scale her insides, desperate for an exit. Another has had a stained black burial lace dress curling and twitching on a bough, trying to claim her organs to build its own body, causing her to wake some mornings, seeing her gauzy organs inching their way towards the dawn, a retracting lung following a misshaping heart, trailing a shrunken kidney, while the dress creases in anticipation, her stomach full of a winding lace horizon. Another is pregnant with a mermaid's bright orange tail, flapping, bending, pulsing in her womb, scattering shimmering scales until her tongue is stained silver. I do not confess. The amalgamation of 100 hatchings ring in my bloodstream as it heats. Spots of gold appear in my peripheral vision. An echo with the stealth of smoke passes through my eardrums. The gaps between the trees have cloud instruments fragmenting. The volume of our voices increases. Our reflections lose their fingers in branches. Clusters of purple geraniums sprout on their backs from a future spring. We hold our bones up to the sky. Grooves appear on the bank, a gutting of earth as the forest creatures quiver while the golden arch appears. Oni has kept her promise. We emerge from the water, dripping rivulets onto the bank. My nipples leak blood. There is a deafening sound in my ears, a roar of such magnitude. I wonder if the others are experiencing it too. We circle the arch, lie in birthing positions, raising our knees up. We give birth. The others place their birth offerings to Oni in the arch. I do not. Confused, the women turn away from me to watch the offerings rupture. I hold Oni's gift to me tenderly. It is another face like mine, baby. I turn my back, drunk with this knowledge, as though I found a silver coin in a dragon fruit. I do not ask Oni how a woman can give birth to herself. The face begins to flicker. Baby's limbs seem fragile. In my grasp, her small, perfect fist grips mine in an unspoken promise. Letting go, I pick up my bone, white and hollowed. I break free from the pack. The sound of a newborn thunders in my ears. I leave my baby behind. Her piercing scream rings through the air like 1,000 clarion calls losing their heads in a treacherous womb. My puckered, bloody nipples turn towards her waiting new mouth, slick and shrill in its sweetness, its divinity, born in love, stamped as weapon by a mother's disappearing shadow. Already commanding the heavens to change fates, we are bound by this second joining, then separated. Bone, dense and changeable in my hand, acting as a compass. Pain emanates from my core. There will be punishments to come. I stifle the screaming inside me that is my child's voice infiltrating my tongue. Running, I press the bone against a shard of light. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can you hear? That's okay. It's a total sensory experience. I think you'll agree with me. Completely original and fearless language. It was lovely to hear that again. I remember it really touched me when I read it the first time. When I read this book, I felt almost as though it were devouring me and I were within the book. So I wanted to ask you many, many questions. But firstly, I wanted to ask, what sort of ideas did you begin with in order to begin to create this world? First of all, the world on Capo Verde.
Yeah, there's so many different elements. Firstly, I was thinking a lot about the complexity of the female experience, especially as a black woman growing up in the UK, the kind of invisibility of that, the frustrations, the joy, the passions, the pleasure. And I was thinking about how rich that is as a subject matter. But I'm also fascinated by history, particularly African history. With my first novel, Butterfly Fish, I wrote about the Benin Kingdom, kind of reimagining 18th century Benin because my family are from there. So for me, it was just absolutely liberating to be able to recreate that on the page. So I'm always interested in African history, especially in the novel form and how I can kind of push the boundaries with it. So I had this idea about female desire, about the complexities of female desire, but also a woman who has this desire but has also had traumas happen to her in the past, traumas that she carries through time and place and space, and what that can look like, and the rage of all of that. So that was the starting point, and I had the image of, the bone is a big motif in the book, but I had the image of marrow spilling from the bone through time, and I kind of started with that point and the character Zulmira. So the novel was crafted around her, really, what her legacy would look like in the present as well, with the present timeline. But I was also heavily influenced by Donna Tartt's The Secret History. I don't know if people have read that book, but it's incredible. And I just love the politics and dynamics between the group of friends who grow up together in this like college setting, but it's so fraught with tension and danger. So I wanted to kind of recreate that in the modern timeline. So there are many, many elements, I think, that kind of sparked the idea for this book. But I was also conscious of it kind of being a spiritual book as well, because it is about shamanism, which is, about healing, but dark shamanism, and the
underbelly.
The underbelly of shamanism, and with women in power, with women, ruling kind of under the guise of the everyday. And I found that hugely inspiring, what that would look like, what that kind of space would be like. Yeah.
But I also found there are a lot of women who are in weakness, who are ill, who are suffering. I mean, I think that's where you've been called a very generous narrator who's full of empathy. And I found that in some of your women, the weaker women characters, who suffered. I mean, you speak very, very accurately, I think, in a very heartfelt way about suffering, female suffering. as well as the rage.
Yeah, no, obviously both sides of the coin are really, really important. You know, we want fully multidimensional female characters. But, you know, all of this is coming from an authentic place. You know, we all, as people, as women, you know, experience things in life that frustrate us. And, you know, I come from a family where there's been a lot that's happened, a lot health-wise, which is why I have this great compassion. You know, I have a sister with epilepsy and other health ailments, and we kind of like spent so much time in hospitals together. You know, I spent a lot of my time in hospitals with my sister, you know, going through all kinds of ups and downs. My mother has lost most of her vision, so as a lot of people don't know this, but I'm a carer as well as a writer and a freelancer and a festival director and curator and, you know, and a novelist, and so I'm juggling all of this stuff, but the writing...
And effectively.
That's
not
really
only juggling, but you're doing it effectively.
That's lovely of you. That's really generous. But so it's coming from a true place, you know, but also wanting to depict these characters that are often not centered, you know, characters that don't have novels written about them. I'm always really keen to center them, especially, you know, black characters and characters of color, because like I said, growing up, I was born in Nigeria. I spent the first 8 years of my life in Nigeria before moving to England to attend a boarding school, a very posh boarding school in Norfolk, which was a massive culture shock, you know, going from the bars of like Lagos to freezing England, and kind of juggling all of these dualities. So all of that is kind of, you know, part of the process. I think it's all been good fodder for writing, you know, so being an outsider, I've always felt like that, you know, coming to England, being an outsider at boarding school, and then, you know, moving to London, and the kids were confused by my accent, and, you know, and being an outsider there. So the kind of nuances of identity, and female identity and black female identity, and what people's expectations are. People are often really shocked when they read my work and then meet me in person, because they're like, oh my God, this stuff that you write is crazy and really wild, but you're so nice.
You are.
They're like, they just can't believe it. They're like, where did these wild experimental stories come from? But I think it's always been there. You know, I grew up in Nigeria listening to my grandmother, you know, share fables. You know, it was kind of griot style, so you would hear a story, and the ending or the middle would change depending on who you heard it from, you know, but there was always a lesson in the stories, and the stories were always fantastical and strange and brilliant. So I think the seeds were kind of planted in me then.
But that's what's so brilliant about what has become your work, because you bring these fables, if you like, or that type of attitude, but you transform it into language. I mean, language is the vehicle. Well, and so I want to talk a little bit about language, your feeling about language, and how you enter it. I mean, because it really carries us into the story in such an original way.
Thank you so much. We were talking about this yesterday.
Yes.
And our passion for language.
Language lovers.
Love language. I was saying to Catherine that I really want readers to not be passive with my work. I like to be disruptive. I like them to engage. Like, I like to play with imagery in a kind of experimental, subversive way. So for me, I'm always looking at, well, how can I flip things? How can I bend worlds? How can I tilt things? Because that's kind of more interesting to me. And I think for me, there always has to be an element of risk. So everything I've ever written, I've been scared to write. And that's how you, I think, produce exciting work, because I always come to the page very humble, but extremely curious, you know, and I let my imagination go. And I think that's the way to approach it. And I have a real love of language, and that I have to credit poetry for that. You know, I am an unabashed poetry fan. You know, when I was working in London in my 20s, I worked for a performance poetry organization, a live poetry, and we would program incredible poets around the country. So I was really privy to experiencing that. But also reading poetry, you know, what it does structurally, formally, what it does with language. And at the time when I was kind of developing my voice, I was reading this incredible Black American poet and essayist and actually incredible intellectual called June Jordan, who I don't think a lot of people are aware of, but her work is so important. And I love what she did with poetry and language. It was so not only hugely political and radical, she was talking about things like queerness and all these, the black experience and all these important topics, but she was framing it and writing it in ways that felt really dynamic. And I would read a June Jordan poem a day, like having an apple a day, like having your vegetables. And it just really lit a fire under me. So that interest, I think, in the lyricism of poetry and, what you can do with language, really gave me a fearlessness on the page, in terms of working on shorter fiction and then novels, yeah.
No, absolutely fearless. But at the same time, in Curandera, one of the things that I really enjoyed was this sensuality and the voice and the organs, the blood, everything. And then you did sort of flip it and bring it to contemporary, gritty London and this sort of friendship between the four characters. Can you tell us about those four characters in contemporary London who sort of collide with this world on the island in the past?
Yeah, so I guess you would call them modern day kin. And kin are the kind of disciples of Oni, who is the shaman god or goddess in Curandera. And she is a goddess who rules with impunity and power and love, but also cruelty too, and we see that in the book. So this group of shamans in the modern day timeline, led by Therese, who's a botanist, have a secret task that they have to complete in another dimension. For Oni, and really, I guess, I don't want to give too much away, but it is about utopias and, kind of building a utopia and what that would look like in another world. So that is kind of their secret task, but that comes with real costs for them. And, we start to see it play out in the friendship and the toll it takes on their bodies. So the idea for that was like, what would paradise look like? If you were kind of drunk on hallucinogenics,
which sometimes occurs.
Yeah, exactly. What would that look like? So that was really fun to create that space for them. But essentially, yeah.
I think the contrast really works. Yeah. I wanted to ask you on that note about Afrofuturism and how that sort of is part of this particular book and your attitude towards time travel and making it sort of an African substance or an...
Yeah, no, really good question. I guess I would say that Curandera is a speculative work, but I think that my writing sort of sits in between genres. And for me, that's a really interesting space to be, because you can't quite nail exactly what the work is, So it's really interesting. With Afrofuturism, I discovered Afrofuturism through reading one of the godmothers, and I think incredible writer, Octavia Butler. I remember an ex-boyfriend gave me a copy of her book, Wild Seed, years ago. But because he really annoyed me, I didn't read the book for years. I just had it on my shelf. I was like, oh God, he was so irritating. But he did have good taste, and I picked up the book. Yeah, he did have good taste. I picked up the book and it blew me away. So that was the seed for kind of Afrofuturism. And then years later, to cut a long story short, because I know we don't have loads of time, but I had always had this dream of cultivating the black alternative space. I feel like in the UK, experimental black writers, more subversive writers of colour, are not given the space that they fully deserve, especially on the festival circuits. So my dream was to create that, to build it, and to cultivate it, hence Black to the Future, which has done really, really well. I'm really proud of it, and we've programmed some incredible artists across disciplines, across film, TV, books, theatre, which was a joy. So yeah, if people want to find out more, they can.
Yeah, we're going to have
Google
to stop
it.
there. I think our time is up, and we haven't had a chance to talk about Black to the Future, which is the festival that Irenosen has founded.